The following contains spoilers for what may as well be the entirety of NieR Automata, as well as minor and less detailed spoilers for two other Yoko Taro-directed games, those being NieR and Drakengard 3. And it's best that you've reached a, finite conclusion to Automata before watching this, as I'm not stopping to give context.
Activating short-range attack gear. Alert. Large enemy group detected.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So, a game created by what on paper is a dream team with the best action, darkest and zaniest direction, and the most brilliant music sung in a chaos language was released, and as it turns out, it's really good. And by good, I mean I could see someone on the brink of suicide pulling the trigger having witnessed some of the shit this game presents. I checked this game's amount of self-versus-self battles, but that body count is probably higher than the amount of machines these androids you play as have dismembered. The game world is heavy with bleak atmosphere and hopelessness, with the main quest and side quest stories loosely revolving around the question of, what's the meaning of life? To which the game happily and continuously replies with, what meaning? The means of conveying life's pain and existential horrors comes in the form of these dopey-looking robots who have gained egos mimicking an aspect of human nature, allowing for stories focusing on particular oddities and issues humans possess that the logic-following androids question the reason behind such things, to which me, a human, is left to question as well, because I don't fucking know either.
How can you love animals and yet not bat an eye at the death of a fellow machine? I do not get these guys.
Yeah.
The range of aspects goes from entire concepts like culture or loyalty to simply being big or apparently having a dream. The machines seem to share core human aspects like family or interpersonal relationships, but then tend to possess a defining quirk on top of that, often simply told by their name. The range of intelligence is also varied, as shown with Pascal, but if that ain't the most human thing, then I don't know what is. All in all, this is a pretty clever way to deal with this kind of material. They're essentially humans, but don't look like them, so it can be gotten away with. The machine aspect ends up being the strongest component of the game's story, as this is where most of the world building an uncomfortable atmosphere comes from. At least in the first half, that is, as the main story and plot are thin here, dealing with two antagonist characters that had little weight behind them. Even with the additional insight from Route B, Adam and Eve are weak, even if they do represent the idea of machines evolving well. The second half of the game, that being Route C, has a lot more happening, even going as far to have an opening credit sequence and title drop again, making it feel like the game has finally started. The feeling of the world felt shortly after starting this route is perfectly somber and empty, as it's rare to deal in a world that feels as if the head count could be tallied with the number of fingers on my hands. Thankfully, the main story finally reaches the proper suicide levels that the side quest in the first half provided. But unthankfully, this half also lacks a proper antagonist, or at least poor payoff of what one is built up to be. But that is kind of the point. The point being that specific components or moments of the game are designed to elicit a feeling from the player. In this case, that feeling being the gray mass of entropy and worthlessness weighing down on them and the characters. The feeling of emptiness or sorrow from seeing the characters' efforts wasted, leaving them to be driven by personal whims to whatever action can atone them or leave them at peace before their inevitable end. I have complaints to some of the ways this is evoked, since it creates boring gameplay and unfulfilled story moments, like with the repetition of routes or not fighting N2, the red girl, by the end of the tower. At the same time though, when something can be argued with, that's the point, it means the game has accomplished what it set out to do. That's the point is a statement I'm usually not too happy to hear, as there's not much to discuss after it's said. I'm of two minds about it, since on one hand it means the experience is perceived as whole in regards to a theme. On the other hand, it nullifies the ability to argue negative feelings experience, since those are intended and I apparently should be fine with it. That said, understanding what an experience is setting out to do is crucial in discussing or critiquing it. For example, complaining that NieR Automata doesn't have enough elements of first-person shooters in it, as the game clearly sets out to be a third-person action RPG bullet hell, is a moot point. That said, I quite enjoy when games go to this length, as games are more than observed, they're controlled and interacted with. So, the idea of painting the player via inconvenience or repetition to slowly weigh on them as the story and world itself begin to do the same is impressive and creates powerful empathy for the characters, having the player feel as if they're in this worthless situation too. In the end though, this whole thing isn't just desolation and wilted lunar tears, since ending E has this absent concept known as hope slathered all over it, leaving this painful journey with as close to a happy ending as it can have. And surprisingly an answer to what gives life meaning.
Life and death. However,
Life is all about the struggle within this cycle.
The true final boss does incredibly well in playing off the player's wear down and burnout by this point, with the other player's messages encouraging or hopefully discouraging the player to see it through, since really the point here is, as based as fuck Pod 042 puts it,
A future is not given to you. It is something you must take for yourself.
that sentiment coupled with the meaning of life given is really what ending Ye is. A future earned from the painful struggle, that even if it seems pointless, efforts don't always go wasted. On a side note, I like to think Yoko Taro, the director, didn't want checkpoints during the credits battle and wanted to have it play more like Drakengard 3's ending D, but they seem to have held him down long enough to put checkpoints in, thankfully. Now, the wear down and burnout I mentioned comes from the repetition of the story structure, and I mainly mean playing through Route B, seeing the same story from a different perspective, and with some bits added at a few parts at the beginning and end, as well as playing as the less action-capable character 9S, something that adds more pain than any atmosphere. The idea of routes in a game whose objective isn't get laid or whose mechanics consist solely of clicking is a bit odd, especially considering the few differences could have occurred in tandem, much like in Route C. But the few exceptional moments and additions to what's already been learned makes this all the worthwhile, since if I'm screaming, holy shit, I probably liked it. I should mention, I'm not averse to the idea of routes, but when two routes offer mostly the same content, it's questionable, although in this case, as I've said, it works in the game's favor. But aside from the routes, the simple objectives and retracing through areas for the side quest is grueling. But thankfully the gameplay is like a dream caked in butter, and the rewards and or payoff for completing the quests are more than desirable. As side quests not only give a ton of rewards, but also often have bitter, sour, disgusting conclusions that left me unmoving for a moment because of the painful digestion. While these sacrifices to convenience can be written off to drive home the theme, this is still a game, and more so than that, it's an action game, a bullet hell action game, two genres that are known for difficulty and demanding skill. And on the bullet hell front, it delivers well, at least in the 2D realm, as the focus moments of bullet hellness are in a contained minigame that builds on its limited mechanics nicely, making for a very shiny difficulty curve. Outside the subdigital realm, though, exists an action RPG where any form of upgrade does matter, meaning getting over-leveled or getting huge from weapons, chips, and pods can harm the difficulty. I found myself not attacking bosses as they were dying at absurdly fast rates just from my laser fire, and I didn't want to be so rude to cut them off during their first line of dialogue. None of this was my intention either, as I was being pulled along by strong story incentive from the side quest, as well as the fat rewards that go to upgrading my weapons. Now, this being an RPG, I want all these pieces to matter, and I'm glad they do. However, in regards to bosses and story segments, if the bosses and enemies, mainly bosses, were scaled according to the overall power of the player, this issue would be heavily alleviated. It's still an action game more than an RPG, exceedingly more than an RPG, so having fights tuned to play at even footing, at least for, say, the first encounter, would make for a stronger experience, and would show off what Platinum does best. More health and defense is really all I ask. Now you might be saying, why not just up the difficulty? To which I say, if normal is, as the game says, the standard most enjoyable difficulty, probably, I shouldn't have to worry about difficulty upping to satisfy my desire of a quality encounter, probably. I'm not looking for a fight that's going to kick my ass to pieces and kill me, since fuck this game's death system, but I want to feel urgency and stress to the encounter as well as length. For what this game is, the following should be the standard for what a boss is. 1. An encounter that utilizes the mechanics in a unique way. This is kind of a gimme for a boss fight and really isn't an issue here, but should still be mentioned. Things like having to aim a bit higher as to not hit the bulletproof plating, or simply having to jump on platforms while avoiding bullets, or hell, even turning on the flashlight to see better. 2, and I'm gonna put a big star next to this one, length that allows for the melee action and bullet hell elements to properly breathe. Having the fight harbor phases that focus on one or the other, or a combination of both. The swift speed of the melee action to the steadiness of the 3D bullet hell phases makes a great paradigm shift. The songstress Simone does this well by having continuous shifts of attack patterns and camera angles. The set track of movement and attacks in her first phase works perfectly for this as well. And 3, a unique moment that introduces something new or plays with existing expectations, such as the shift to a 2D perspective for the Adam and Eve fight, introducing hacking during Simone, or going berserker mode during Hegel. Heigl? I don't know. Basically, bosses should be on par with Simone since she exudes these qualities to a great degree. And above all else, she feels like a boss fight, not a fight intended to add to the story or be a cool cinematic moment. I'm honestly shocked how many fights ended up existing for effect rather than as a straight up boss. It's odd to see something suffer from too much production quality. I'm not gonna say all should be just bosses and story and its presentation is what this game seems to care about most, but the action aspect should be satisfied throughout as it's more prominent than any other component. Now, I could go on into other aspects or components like literally everything involving audio, especially its direction or the stunning aesthetics and art style, but I either felt fulfilled from them, or if I didn't, then it's a minor complaint that I don't want to waste time griping about because so far, I've failed to talk in detail about the exceedingly exceptional thing this game does. Video games are a special medium not only because of the interactivity and wide array of capabilities, but because it has a universal way of conveying information to those playing and even those just viewing. This conveyance comes in the form of an interface. Interfaces are more than just HUDs or things popping up during gameplay. They're every screen outside of that too. Title screens, game over screens, shop menus, loading screens, pause menus, main menus, etc., etc. These are designed to be consistent, as to never lie, information put there by some omniscient all-knowing force, sometimes called a developer. These are something players accept just as much as the arbitrary rules a game is created on, as their ubiquitous nature starts even before the game does. Some games do well in tying interfaces to the world, making it diegetic, as in existing within the game's world, Automata being one of these games. Interfaces are something so consistent and accepted in video games that it allows for this medium to execute two things. One of these goes beyond interfaces and even games, but when something is believed to be a source of consistency or a convention, when this is broken, the feelings evoked are often very powerful. As with games, having a component shift to something new after it's unconsciously agreed to be trusted separates the exceptional from the safe and scared. In Automata's case, these feelings evoked being along the lines of shock, confusion, discomfort, or more positively, awe, excitement, or hype. Automata exceeds at this technique with not only interfaces but across many of its aspects. The second thing being what I believe is the most appropriate and greatest way a game can tell a story, or in most cases greatly add to it. That is, through the interface, as it's bringing something only a video game does into the equation of storytelling. And I should clarify, I'm not talking about subtitles or text boxes spelling out what's being said or text literally telling a story. I'm talking about how a piece of the interface can tell something untold or complement what's currently happening. Games are so different and contextual it's impossible to define how this can be done, but the best I can say is that it utilizes components of the interface most tied into what's happening with the story. In Automata's case, the best interface storytelling it has comes in very interesting uses of the menus to tie the interface into the game world and in moments that break conventions or corrupt the interface. Both these making for continuous unique moments that makes this game extraordinary and exceptional. And I should note, this kind of stuff should be expected from Yoko Taro, as he's an avid pursuer of what games can do that can help him tell a story or elicit a powerful feeling, making games as games, having the product feel holistic. Look up Ending D of NieR if you want to know what I'm talking about, because that is one of the most exceptional things I've seen a video game do. Something that Automata even tries to reproduce in some fashion. Anyway, time for a quick story. Back whenever the demo for Automata came out, the one thing that stuck out to me was during the starting sequence leading up to fighting the giant saw arm Marks, and, well, I think that's his name. And even a bit into the fight with him, the pod program is unavailable for use. When attempting to use it, a prompt appears saying, "You do not have the authority to perform that command," which got me excited, as it gave me the notion this game was going to be about confinement and control, and the suffering the player characters go through because they lack free will even though they have an emotional capacity. That there'd be a moment where all my actions and abilities were slowly taken away as 2B's fighting off other Yorha soldiers attempting to detain or kill her for disobeying protocol, and that prompt seen at the beginning of the demo pops up for each action attempted. Now, while I missed the shot on the theme, 85% of what I just described does happen, and it even ties into status effects, which is even better. But what happened here was, an ability or abilities I always had access to was taken away, leaving me in a scattered state, aka a convention broke. And at the same time, the in-world interface conveys the corruption occurring. Now here's a few other examples from Automata of special moments involving interfaces like this. During Adam's first encounter, the machine's ability to evolve and adapt is not only conveyed through the expanding moveset and dialogue, but by Adam himself leveling up. During the Simone fight when 2B is hacked for the first time and the health bar blasting through one side of the screen and out the other because of it. 1, this is awesome because the hacking minigame is out of fucking nowhere, and 2, unless the player blew up 2B with self-destruct, this is the first time interface corruption is shown. Hacking sequences that include 3D characters and or the sequence complementing or representing what's occurring outside of it. 2B's final moments as she struggles towards the shopping complex and the machine infection is shown via a completion bar and percentage. Pod 153 and based as fuck Pod 042 communicating through a loading screen, further confirming or tying the screen into the world as more than just an Android data transfer screen for proper aesthetic effect. And a fun thing to note, if you take the digits of Pod 042, those being the digits 0, 4, and 2, and adding +1 to each of them, you'll find an interesting number. And my favorite one, I don't even know what this counts as, but I haven't screamed what the fuck so loud in my life. Booting up 2B after the prologue in Route B and having the recording of what I did inside the setting menus in Route A play as 9S Proctor's her, or me, through the menus. Also, this booting sequence in Route A is when the main menu interface is conveyed to tie into the androids by having to up the brightness to restore vision, as well as upping the voice volume to hear 9S.
Can you hear me? Alright, are we good now?
Before closing out, there's one final thing related to interfaces that this game is notable for. Something comes along with interfaces and their conventions in the form of a sort of omniscient voice, an all-knowing formless objective view as in everything it presents is taken as true. In the case of game interfaces, this would come in the form of something like, do you want to take a break? Load this save file, or press any button. The notable thing about this voice in Automata is that it has a hint of personality, or at least it has the capability of a personality. Earlier I read off the description of the normal difficulty setting. Setting descriptions are technical and concise as to easily tell the player what they do, but in the case of this difficulty setting, it tells what it does, but has an added flair to it by simply adding, probably, to the description. This personality is absent from the rest of the game, barring the description and narration of the 21 joke endings, ending E, and the unique accept or decline text when speaking to an NPC, though this could be argued that it's the player character speaking it. However, the flavor of the responses are usually not in line with the speaking character's personality. In the case of ending E though, the voice's personality isn't quirky or humorous, but intense, brash, and discouraging, as if the concept of worthlessness has personified itself as the omniscient voice to antagonize the player in the final struggle. Thankfully, some dude from Japan who either gave up or is a hero was there to save me. But this use of another unknowingly accepted component of a game is exploited here exceptionally, not only breaking the consistency of this voice, but conveying the antagonistic theme through the interface, adding to the bizarre and appropriate finale all the more. My feelings on NieR Automata can be summarized with the word fulfilling. Nothing was left to be desired since the marriage of elements, the extent of their utilization, the bizarre direction and presentation, and the sheer volume of all the content made this game nothing but satisfying. Sure, there are problems as mentioned, but as a whole it's extraordinary. You know, it's, Gestalt.